Hello COMS 363 students, this is Dr. Smith, and this video is going to give an overview of improving your visuals for your final report. What this presentation covers is the assignment requirements for the final report, what it means to have original tables and graphs, some of the principles of design, including the content and purpose and the visual design, and the kinds of information that are required with all visuals that come from our survey data. What it doesn't cover is how to use data within the visual or from the visual within a paragraphs argument, and it is necessary to do that. Otherwise, your paragraphs will be devoid of data, and so you do need to select data from a visual and put it into a paragraph where you discuss it and refer to that table or figure by number. It doesn't cover how to place tables and figures within your report sections. That's something that's structural. But the general principle there is to keep the tables and figures within their relevant topical section or structural section, and only put it in an appendix if it is large enough to qualify for that. And it doesn't cover other types of figures besides graphs. So the only two types of visuals that are covered in these presentations are tables on the one hand and graphs. So in APA, anything that is not in a table is considered a figure, but there's many types of figures. You could have a screenshot or a photo, you could have a model or a flow chart, but the kinds of figures we're looking at here are graphs, such as bar graphs, pie graphs, circle graphs, that kind of thing. In your final report requirements, if you have a group of 4, the standard is to present at least 6 original tables or graphs. That's throughout your report, and that includes the table that goes in your methods section, and there's only one table that's necessary for your methods. The rest of your tables and graphs should be related to findings, and they have to be of survey data or primary website data. So survey data is one thing you can use it for, and website data includes things like content inventory that people did in Report A for their individual report. Before I leave this side of the figure, we've got here original tables. The word original is going to be explained later. Additional figures, you can add to those, and the additional figures will include screenshots and flowcharts. So those kinds of things can supplement, and oftentimes they're necessary to provide a screenshot when you are providing visual arguments based on visuals on the website. Original tables and graphs. Here it was explained in Report B instructions. So if you are not familiar with those instructions, keep these in mind. And the principle was that you are not supposed to merely imitate or take screenshots of any data displays provided in your data files. And if you're familiar with the data there, it was in an Excel file, and they provided tables, and it's just not enough to only select a few answer items from one question or even all of the answer items and just redisplay the data, changing their order or just changing their shading or their rules or their fonts. Okay, so it's not just about the superficial elements of data design, but the assignment is asking you to make something original using the survey data. And how do you do that? How to create original visuals. And this was also explained in Report B. This is verbatim. There's some ways you can do it. One of them is to make a single graph or table that compares responses across 2 related survey questions from different parts of the survey instrument. So, for example, you can bring in an item or 2 from question 23 and another item from question 17 if they happen to be on a similar topic, such as navigation or ethos, or if they're both on the topic of visuals. Another way you could do it, and this is also correlating possibly 2 questions, when you break down responses to usability and rhetorical features, and you break them down by the type of respondent. If you're interested in, let's say, finding out if age or experience with websites or education levels made any difference in how people responded to the website. That might not necessarily be the case, so it might not be interesting. You might also just find that correlating two survey questions, how people answered one question, did it affect how they answered another question, might also be a good correlation. Here's some general principles for both tables and figures. The content and purpose of the visual should not be something that can just be presented in a quotation or a verbal description. Oftentimes we see even screenshots that just duplicate text and that aren't talking about the way the text is arranged, or their fonts, or italics, or bold, or any visual element whatsoever. So in the same way, you don't want to have a table or figure if you can just simply create it in a list, a bullet list, or a numbered list, or a series of 2 bullet lists, or just a bunch of sentences. So if that's the case, then a person will wonder, why is there also a table provided for this? There needs to be just enough data to make an argument, but not too much to overwhelm the person. The issue comes in where tables can actually present a lot of information, more than a graph. So what's too much for a graph might not be too much for a table, because they can hold a lot of different data types, and you can mix data types. So if you have to combine 2 questions, it's easier to combine 2 questions if they have 2 different rating scales if you use a table, and if you use averages rather than different rows for each rating or different columns for each rating. So sometimes tables are more flexible in presenting various types of data. Effective design visually and other types of elements. Word choice has to be precise, clear, accurate, and simple as possible, and that's not always easy. Oftentimes when you're limited in space, people choose the wrong words, or else they don't use the grammatically clear verb form or noun form. That they use a different kind of verb form or noun form that just raises questions or makes people feel puzzled. So the word choice is important in keeping things simple and clear. Visual elements need to be considered, and I go through that in more detail in the next 2 presentations, the next 2 videos. Design consistency throughout your document. So now it's important, if you're in a group, that you don't have purple graphs from one person and green graphs from another, that you have a similar color scheme, a similar type of text style, etc. Larger scale principles to keep in mind, otherwise you might kind of lose track of why you're even doing this. Howard Weiner wrote an article in 1992 called Understanding Graphs and Tables, and even though his article was focused more on testing people's ability to comprehend tables, he did have some principles of what would be good graphics. So he says a good graphic does these 2 things. On the one hand, it does answer the expected questions on the topic, and you have the clarity of the visual and the clarity of the verbal, both playing into that. But on the other hand, it's not just so simple and obvious, it does invite deeper questions. It presents the data that is worthy of discussion and analysis within a paragraph. So other things that this covered was 3 levels of questions that graphs can answer, and they're graded from simplest, number 1, to the more complex, deep, and profound or insightful in level 3. So the simplest form of information would be just simply extracting data. So it just answers what exists, what was the data. And the next level goes beyond that and offers a little bit more of trends or connections. And that's why we were asking you to not just merely duplicate the data from the Excel files, but to show connections, or not necessarily trends because we don't have data over time, but connections between the parts of the data set that are related in some way. And then a third level might be a deeper structure of data in order to see something surprising or a group or a pattern arising through the correlation of data or comparison of trends. So you could see sort of as you're looking at a pattern, you go, oh, there's an increase over here, or this is the highest number. Why is that the case? Or all of these numbers are the same. There's nothing unusual here. Isn't that fact in itself unusual or surprising? Or what does it mean? And so if you want to show your skill with tables and graphs, and if you want to show off that you understand the data and the issues at hand, and if you really want to impress us, as well as in future life, in your professional life, then aim for levels 2 and 3. And level 1 is oftentimes just considered so elementary that you might want to start with it, but you don't want to end there. Now, when we're presenting survey data, it's important to present context. Otherwise, people are not able to interpret the meaning of the data in context. And there's complex elements of context when you're reporting survey data. And it was explained in Report B requirements. This is almost verbatim. I've just bulletized it a bit and explaining it. We've got here survey question number is required, and that's going to refer people to your Appendix A. And of course, they won't be forced, they shouldn't be forced to flip to Appendix A. You should give them the actual question number and the exact survey question wording. And give them the order of the questions asked if it's not randomized. But remember that answer items in most cases were randomized. Axis titles and legends are always required, even when you might think that they're obvious. They're necessary. Data labels, that could be at the end of bars on a bar graph where you have a number, or it could be along an axis where you give measures in a scale, like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And you need units of measurement, whether you're saying it's some number of comments or number of respondents or percentage of respondents or percentage of people who answered poor, number 1. So that's important. But you also need the verbal rating scales, the meaning. If it's a scale of 1 to 5, does 1 mean poor, or does 1 for another question mean none whatsoever? Okay, what kind of wording was given with the label 1 when the 1 through 5 scale was given to a respondent? And you also often need the total number of respondents, especially if you're giving percentages or you want people to understand the data in context. And even if you have 53 respondents throughout one survey, some people may have answered or skipped that question. So it's important for mathematical understanding. So those are the basics, and I encourage you to look at my other videos that go into samples of specific tables and specific graphs and talk about how to use captions and show you what went wrong in the reasoning or in the design. So I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.